We are delighted to present Dublin One City, Many Stories, a unique video collaboration between the Irish Writers' Centre and Dublin UNESCO City of Literature, supported by Dublin City Council. Over the course of 6 videos, we'll feature iconic writers from the past 50 years, alongside today's contemporary and emerging writers. Each will share their writing journeys, their experience of writing and performing in Dublin, and their thoughts on Dublin as a complex, inspiring character. We'll hear from writers making waves internationally, writers making Ireland their new home, and above all, writers who are adding to Ireland's rich legacy of literature on the world stage.
As Director of Dublin UNESCO City of Literature, it's with great pleasure that I introduce the following video featuring authors of One Dublin, One Book campaigns and the Dublin Literary Award, 2 initiatives of Dublin City Council managed by the Dublin UNESCO City of Literature team and the staff of Dublin City Libraries. Writers Dwyer Hickey, Andrew Hughes, Nuala O'Connor and Peter Sirr are interviewed by Rick O'Shea on how Dublin features in their writing. Mike McCormack, winner of the 2018 Dublin Literary Award, talks to Damien B. Donnelly about being a recipient of the award for his wonderful inventive novel, Solar Bones. I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome along to the Hugh Lane Gallery here in Dublin, where I'm joined by 2 previous writers of One Dublin, One Books, Andrew Hughes and Dwyer Hickey. Thanks for joining me. Andrew, I'm going to start with you. The Coroner's Daughter, one of the settings for it is the place we're sitting in right now, not the Hugh Lane Gallery as it is today, but Charlemont House as it was at the time. Tell me a little bit about your interest in these old houses and maybe the crimes that were committed in them.
Yeah, so I very much came to writing fiction from a history background. I studied history and English in Trinity, then I did the archives course in UCD and became an archivist. But I also offered a service where I would research the history of Georgian houses in Dublin. I would scour deeds and census returns and street directories and find out all the people who lived in a certain house, then research their lives, see if they got up to anything interesting and put together a narrative. And my first book then was a social history of Fitzwilliam Square, which came from all of that research that I was doing. I had no thought of becoming a writer at the time, not a fiction writer anyway, but I didn't realize that all that research was providing me with a wonderful setting for historical fiction, and all those hundreds of lives were a cast of characters. So when I started writing, I came across a story through that research again, that I said this could make a good first novel. I wrote that as The Convictions of John Delahunt. And after that, it was a case of finding a new character. Delahunt was a villain. He was a murderer and a Dublin Castle spy. So I knew for the second book, I wanted the character to be a young woman. I wanted her to be the hero of the story. So the idea of The Coroner's Daughter just popped into my head. But I was taking part in a writer's workshop when we used to meet in the Gresham in O'Connell Street. And I was walking home one day, just at the very start of when I was just forming this whole idea. And I was walking up through the east side of Parnell Square there, and I was looking around going, there's the Rotunda, there's Charlemont House there in the distance, the Blessington Street Basin is just up the road, St. George's Church is around the corner. I said, why don't I just set the novel here? And I was looking around going, this would be a perfect setting. So through that, the research that I was doing, I felt very comfortable in this 19th century world. I had this cast of characters. And so it's just a case of making the most out of this wonderful historical fabric that Dublin provides.
For any writer of historical fiction that I've ever spoken to, they say that the research can be both the hardest and the easiest thing, because frequently they can find themselves being lost in it and then realizing 4 years down the line you're still researching the novel that you were attempting to write. Tell me a little bit about crime forensics in the 19th century and how investigations were run in the 19th century, because that's obviously an important part of the book.
Yes, so I knew I wanted to set the book in the 19th century. I chose 1816 because that was known as the year without a summer. This strange climatic event happened in the East Indies, and it sent a dust cloud over Europe and created this very eerie atmosphere. So 1816 was the year I wanted to do it. So I said I better check how coroners courts worked in that period, what kind of forensic technology there was. And there just so happened to be a book published in 1816 by a surgeon called George Mayle, called the epitome of forensics. He was a surgeon who noticed that when he was called to give evidence at coroner's inquests, the coroner very often would have no idea about the latest medical advances and how to spot signs of a mysterious death or a suspicious death. And so for the sake of coroners, he put together this epitome of all the latest technology and so forth. And for me, it was just perfectly timed. And it became the textbook for Abigail Lawless and her forensic adventures. And so it was just fun using the techniques that Mayle outlined. It kind of created a nice kind of eerie, early scientific feel for the novel. And yeah, so the research, that kind of research, you find a book like that, it's great, you can get lost in it. But then you're also looking at newspaper reports, looking at the transcripts of coroners' courts and so on. And bit by bit, you build up a sense of the world. You also kind of get an ear for the language that's being used, and you come across interesting stories that can inspire plot points in the book as well.
The thing that interests me about your two first novels as well is that they're set in two Dublin squares, Fitzwilliam Square and here in Parnell Square. Two places that, if you were to put your historical researcher hat on, have kind of gone in different directions between the time that you wrote those books were set in and now. It's an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of where we almost get this idea of North Side and South Side Dublin and the different levels of wealth and so on either side of the river. That's mostly due to the fact that the Fitzwilliam estate, which is Merrion Square and Fitzwilliam Square and so on, was owned by the Fitzwilliam family. That was inherited then by the Pembroke family, and the Pembroke estate stayed together as one unit, mostly, for the most part, and it still is an entity today. And because of that, the streets and squares on the south side of the river were managed in a much more holistic sense. North of the river, the Gardner estate was broken up, and so bit by bit, blocks of houses were sold off. Some weren't kept in the style that they should have been, and so the whole kind of fabric of the north side of the river became a bit more run down. So that is largely the reason for that. And I set the first book in that south side of the square, but as I said, I was just walking through this area, realizing that although it's not, it still has its genteel charm, but 200 years ago it would have been the most fashionable part of the city. So again, it'd be a nice way to explore that history of the city and to explore these wonderful buildings around here to set The Coroner's Daughter here.
Christine, I've done the counting and I hope I've done it right. You've set either wholly or partially 5 novels and a collection of short stories in Dublin. What is it about Dublin that inspires you as a writer?
Well, I don't know. I think it's probably because I know it so well. Like when I was a child, I spent an awful lot of time in the company of my father, who was always out and about, and we would spend the day in various pubs usually, and then the evenings would be at race courses, like the Phoenix Park race course was, for example, that's gone now. But by the time I was 5, I knew every race course and every pub, I'd say, in Dublin. And so I got to know it like that. And also my parents, my mother was from Drumcondra, and she was the youngest of a large family, and she had sort of siblings speckled all over the place. You know, they were in different parts of the north side of the city. And my father was from the Liberties, although for the 8 years previous to us getting married, he lived in the Ormond Hotel. And it kind of meant something different to live in a hotel in those days. But anyway, the idea in Dublin then was that if you couldn't leave O'Connell Bridge at 5 o'clock and be home in time for your tea, you were a culture. And that was it. You were outside, you weren't a Dubliner. So anyway, I kind of knew a lot of the different parts of Dublin. And I knew that's where I wanted to set my first novel. I was interested, I had won a few short stories and I was interested in broadening the canvas. And I wanted to explore the idea of my grandfather, who used to own a pub called the Irish House on the Quays, which was a very famous pub. And the Dublin city offices are there now, I think, never forgiven by the family for knocking this beautiful pub down. But anyway, he didn't own it for long because he was too fond of his own produce, and that went by the wayside and the family kind of went in decline. But he started life as a dancer, a soft shoe shuffler. in the Olympic, which was the Empire Theatre then. And I was kind of, when I started to look into this, I was fascinated by it. And I like Andrew says, I just felt something about the era. I could that kind of time, just before the First World War, and I just wanted to see. You get an idea of the time you're interested in, and you get an idea of what the streets were like and the people were like then. And I used a lot of newspapers and ads and stuff to get me going. And the idea was to write a story about his life. He started as the spoiled younger son of a large family who were doing very well in the merchant classes. You know, they had a bottle factory and they had the pub and they had all sorts of things. And everybody dies of TB, all the men die of TB except him. And he was the runt, he was the small fella. And he was very small, and the rest of the big strong men who were all over 6 foot, they all died. And he was put into business because you couldn't let the girls into business then, it just wouldn't be respectful. And he basically just pissed it up. And the family ended up living in sort of like tenements, but they lived in a garage. They had a car, that was the only thing. He did have a car. And he used to keep a car for a very wealthy American. So the American would come over and pay him money to keep the car and only drive it maybe once a year. So they had a car and they had nothing else, and they kind of lived in poverty, I suppose. And I was interested in that. But as you may have gathered by now, I'm such a waffler. By the time the book was finished, he was only 18. He was still only 18, you know, and then he after getting married. And so then I went on and I did The Gambler and The Gatemaker. So then I wanted to do a different one. I did Tatty, and that's set in Dublin. But I think my most Dublin novel is probably The Cold Eye of Heaven, where it couldn't be set anywhere else. It's kind of one that gets into the bones and the guts and the blood of the city. And I can't see it as being set anywhere else, you know.
Just maybe to expand it out a little bit, I've seen you talk before about your love for Joyce and Virginia Woolf's city novels, particularly like Ulysses and Mrs. Dalloway. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that. Why?
I just think there's something about a city. It's always changing, but you don't notice it. You don't notice it at the time, but it's always changing. It's always moving. It has its own smells. It has its own sounds. I sort of feel that we've lots of wonderful books being published, of course, but there seems to be more of a slant towards small town Ireland now, and people don't really write books about Dublin. Whereas I said, it could not be set anywhere else. That, you know, like Ulysses could not be set anywhere else. It'd have to be Dublin. And I just find, for me, a city is, and somebody moving through a city and how the city inhabits the person and the person inhabits the city, and its reciprocal relationship and everything that goes on around it. And Dublin City in particular is compact. It's ideal for the coincidence that's necessary to fiction. It's gossipy, it's kind of slightly sour at times. There's a particular sense of humour. And it's, you know, as I said, the coincidence thing, that you could be on a bus, you look down, you see a fella you don't even know, or a person you don't even know, and that night you'll walk into a pub and you'll see them. So there's this crisscross thing that I think Joyce very much recognised in Ulysses and used in Ulysses. And that, to me, I love all that about Dublin City in particular.
Andrew, The Coroner's Daughter, when you were in the process of writing it, and you've talked about it already, there was a course going on in the Irish Writers' Centre just next to where we are right now about historical fiction. Tell me about the influence that had on the writing of the book.
Well, that actually came earlier. When I wrote my social history of Fitzwilliam Square, that was published by David Gibbons of the Liffey Press. And that was 2011, and I remember him asking me, do I have another book set up? What do I plan to do next? I said I might try my hand at fiction, and if I'm going to write fiction, I might try historical fiction. And David said, it just so happens that my brother, the author John Gibbons, is giving a historical fiction workshop in the Irish Writers' Centre, and it begins in 2 weeks' time. And I said, oh, that's ideal, I'll go along to that. So, as I said, I'd been writing history, but I'd never tried my hand at fiction before. Down I go to the Irish Writers' Centre, into one of those little rooms with the square table, and there are 5 or 6 other new authors there. And for the first few weeks, I was just too nervous to submit anything. I was letting other people submit their work, and I was commenting on it. But then John, the mentor, said, look, Andrew, you know, you're not going to get any benefit from the course unless you write something. So I wrote the first few pages of what turned out to be my first novel, The Convictions of John Delhunt. And so it was just amazing to be able to write that, to show it to other people in the same boat as me who are just starting out, to get feedback, pointers about where it's going wrong, but just that sense of a small community that developed. We remained friends. I mean, the course went on for 6 or 8 weeks, I can't quite remember, but we just continued working and meeting together, first in the library bar in the Central Hotel, then we switched to the Gresham. During COVID, we started to meet on Zoom, and so we've continued for the last 12 or 13 years, and very successfully. There's 3 of us who have had novels published. There are other writers who come and go. So I have kind of done all my fiction writing with this small group of friends in this workshop, and I can't quite imagine writing any other way. I'm sure it's not for every author. I'm sure some would like it, and some, and I've seen authors come and go in the group who perhaps bristle when things are said about their work, which is perfectly fine, acceptable. But we formed this tight bond of a few writers, and it all came from just this chance encounter in the Irish Writers' Centre, and this chance encounter that the publisher of my first book, his brother, happened to be running a historical fiction workshop, worked out perfectly for me, and yeah, my whole writing career has stemmed from that.
So because some of you are still in contact 10 years later, do you feel that's quite important, certainly for you as a writer, the idea of having a community of other fellow writers around you to encourage each other, how does that work for you?
Yes, it's been very important for me. As I say, I've not really known anything else, like the fact that I went there and have written all my novels through this process. But I think, writing tends to be, it is a solitary pursuit. So it's important to have people that you can either show your work to, or just to kind of reach out and have a support network. And that's what that group provided. So we've been there for each other through the good times and the bad, through manuscripts getting rejected by agents and publishers, and when a novel doesn't work and they have to set it aside and begin something new. And we've been there during the good times as well. I mean, one of the members, Caroline Madden, just had a book published last week, and we were all there to celebrate that launch. So there's been that, so yeah, through good times and bad, they've been there, but also just the nuts and bolts of, especially when I was starting out, just finding my way through how fiction works, and the small little mistakes that are pointed out to you when you give your work to somebody else, especially when you have a mentor there who is experienced. Just how if characterization is working, if moments throughout the novel are earned, if the plot is working, if things are paying off correctly. So that process has been brilliant, and I really appreciate the Irish Writers' Centre being there. It's a place that I always look to and saying that's where this all began, And it was nice then when The Coroner's Daughter was chosen as One Dublin One book, and we were looking around for a place to launch it and so on. Charlemont House really worked because part of the book was set here, but it was also nice just to say it's only a few doors down from the Irish Writers' Centre. And when the book was being launched here, I was able to point that out, that only a few short steps. I can remember going along full of trepidation, never having written anything before. And if somebody said, don't worry, in 10 years' time you'll be in there when the Lord Mayor will be introducing your book to an appreciative crowd. So yeah, that was a wonderful journey from those few doors down to this place here.
Christine, I am going to talk to you about Tatty, your One Dublin One book, but I do want to ask you about the Dublin trilogy, and you kind of alluded a little bit to it. It's set between about 1913 and 1956.
About 1913, and it finishes, I think, in about 1956, thereabouts.
Right. How do you go about recreating the energy of Dublin, the sound, the smells, the detail? I know you talked a little bit about looking back through newspapers. It must be a tough process.
It is, but I think acting and writing, there's a similarity. You have to become the character. So I always write just from the character's point of view. And even though there might be loads of people in the book, I will usually hone in on one or two people that are observing them. So I'm in their heads. So what I would do is, Dublin didn't change all that much. The big changes in Dublin, I think, occurred in the 80s and 90s, mainly in the 90s, the big changes. But when I was growing up, you could walk down the quays, it was still full of bockety old houses and auctioneers' rooms and books and barrows, and very much like the Dublin Joyce would have known. And you could still smell Guinnesses and the smell of horse shit and the sound of the horses on cobblestones. All that still existed. So I was able to remember. And I also, when I walk, most people when they walk, they look ahead or they look at the ground. I always look up. And that's where you really see Dublin, because the tops of the buildings don't change. So if you're walking down Dame Street, and you will see that beautiful swerve of buildings, and downstairs at the ground level, there could be all sorts of awful shops, and you don't have to look at those. But you can, if you look up, nothing has changed really. And so I would do that a lot, and just really imagining my way into the person and using what I knew. I just tried to be. Big things were going on in the world, but I tried to live it as an ordinary person would in that time, with their own little problems, you know. And that changed, of course, because by the time I got to the third one, there was a lot of it, some of it was set in Belfast during the Blitz in Belfast. And I got information from my father about that, because he worked in Harland and Wolff during the war. So I got some information about that, and I just kind of, when I'm writing, I look at what I'm writing in my mind. And then I just kind of try my best to, I think the biggest trick of writing is forgetting about yourself, that you don't exist, you know, and then becoming the people. And you have to do that, don't you, at a start?
Yeah, it's very much like that as well. I started as an archivist, professional archivist, and my first job was in RTE. And I was working to shot list programs, which just involved describing shot by shot what was on a piece of film. So that was a very descriptive process.
Yeah.
And again, this is way before I ever thought about being a fiction writer. And so I think because of that, I've always imagined a room. I choreograph a scene in my head before it happens. And then once it's all set in my head, I can sit down and
the storyboard things. Yeah, which I've done too as a child. I used to do that.
And it's also a sense then of writing historical fiction in Dublin. It's not that much of a leap of imagination when you can see the rooms that your characters are actually going to be in. And like you say, the
especially around here. Especially around here, yeah.
I'm conscious that we haven't really talked about Tatty yet, your One Dublin One book.
Yeah.
It was 16 years between publication and then between it being chosen as One Dublin One book. What was that like to go back and revisit something that you'd written 16 years prior to that? Did it give you a new perspective on it? How was that as a writer?
Well, Tatty is a very personal book. It's very autobiographical, and basically it's the story of a little girl. Well, she grows up it's episodic. So we meet her, I think, when she's almost 5, and we leave her when she's almost 14. So every chapter she grows a year, so her perception changes. And that was one of the things I wanted to do, is to experiment with the voice of a child as somebody develops. But at the same time, it was a story about my own life and my own parents. And when it was published in 2004, my mother was still alive. We were estranged, but she was still alive, and I was aware of that, so I kept denying in interviews, oh, it's only slightly autobiographical, or some of it is, or some of it isn't. And I was trying not to, to hurt her. But I do think, my brothers used to say to her, you should read it, I do think it might have helped her if she'd read it, but she didn't. She presumed it would be worse. The mother would come out worse than it did. But anyway, I felt thrilled. Of course, it's One City, One Book. But I also said, oh, I wish they'd have picked the Cold Eye of Heaven instead, because I was having to revisit the idea of being an adult child of alcoholics, which is always very painful to do. And even though Tatty, it was a breakthrough novel for me, really, I think, because it spoke to so many people, and so many people wrote to me. Like, I had hundreds of letters from people saying, you're telling my story, and you've really helped me. And though I helped them a lot, I'm not sure sometimes that I helped myself, because I had buried things, and then they came to the surface again, But I do think as a novel, it worked very well. But, sometimes I'd write and you're in the zone, you get into the car, then to go and pick up the kids or whatever, and you're thinking, I went really well today. And then I think, oh my God, shit, it was real. It actually did happen. So you feel kind of awful then for a while. But then I was so busy with all the events that you do. You could not see the paper in the diary that, I was going to do this, doing this, and everything else. And then we got the call to say, the books are in the shop now. They were in the shop. They're going into the shop over the weekend. The books are going to be full of Tatty everywhere. There's going to be the banner on Liberty Hall and this and that and the other. And lockdown happened. And I didn't actually have to do anything, which was funny. It was actually funny. It was a weird year for me. It was such a funny year because I had all that build up about the One City, One Book. And then nothing happened. I tried to compensate with Zoom as much as I could because I knew the city libraries had gone to so much trouble. And but it's not the same. We were all only getting used to Zoom and, you know, eyebrows and you're on mute and all this sort of stuff. And then in the same year, then I won 2 big prizes for another novel. And the same thing, no celebration, nothing. I mean, when I heard that I'd won the Walter Scott for the Narrow Land, myself and my husband walked up to the top of the road to tell the cows, there's a herd of cows in the field of where our estate ends, and came home and had ice cream. And that was kind of it, you know. But even though the house smelled like flowers all over, people were sending me flowers. So it smelled like a flower shop. So it was kind of strange. I was sort of spared the tatty thing, having to speak about it, but maybe if I had done, it would have been all out of my system now, you know.
Andrew, it was a slightly shorter period of time for you, just 5 years between the writing of the book and then it being chosen as One Dublin, One Book for the Coroner's Daughter. How did that feel for you?
It was great. It was great. Like, novels tend to have their kind of moment in the sun. They come out and they get a bit of notice and so forth, and then it fades away. So you're kind of working on new stuff and you think that that's all in the past. So just to get this message, the email said, you know, private and confidential at the top in big capital letters. I said, oh my God, what's this? Is it from the taxman or what's going on here? And of course I was hyper aware of One Dublin, One Book throughout the years. And you know, I was looking at the banners and so on, and go, maybe one year one of my novels might be picked for that. So it was fantastic. And I was lucky in that I was the first year after the COVID interruptions. I think Ronan Hession had most of his events on Zoom as well. So it was, you know, back on full steam ahead, 15 events in the month. And so for me it was kind of a point in my career where I had finished a new book and I was struggling to find a publisher for it, and I was kind of going, things aren't going so well. So it was a huge boost for me to get the news, and it helped then getting this new book published. But also then just to revisit the book with kind of such a sense of celebration and the pride of your family coming to events and coming to the launch and so on. And so yeah, no, it was a wonderful wonderful month. It was all a bit of a blur. I mean, almost every second day you're doing something, and other things are going on in the city that you want to kind of take part in as well and go visit. But yeah, just to deal with so many readers, kind of one-on-one, and people who are come and asking questions about the book was a real thrill. Just this sense that it's being read by so many people at the same time, and you're kind of thinking to yourself, Abigail is being imagined by 1,000 different people at the moment, and the story is being interpreted in different ways. And then, yeah, just to kind of go through all the...
Did you get the Braille book?
I did.
I just thought that was wonderful. I thought that was great. I thought that was brilliant. I was thrilled. I was thrilled with that, yeah.
In this room, I was presented with it.
Yeah.
The National Council for the Blind each year produce a Braille version of whichever One Dublin book has been chosen.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
And I think that I only got a small portion of it. It was a very large folder, kind of A3 sized folder. So that was just lovely, and it's like pride of place in my shelves at the moment, this Braille version of the novel.
I'm going to maybe finish by asking both of you the same question. Who do you think has written about Dublin in a way that captures it really well?
I think it has to be Joyce. I mean, I think for me, when I started to read Ulysses, by accident, I went into Waterstones to buy James Plunkett's book, and I couldn't remember his name, and I said, it's written by James, somebody had set in Dublin, and they handed me Ulysses. And I was thinking, we have that at home. I always thought it was one of my brother's, an adventure book for boys type thing. And I read it, and a lot of it went over my head, but there was recognitions about the area, about Bloom especially, and about how he lived in a city and how he thought about the city and the people he met. And I don't think that's ever going to be bettered by anybody.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. It's hard to look past Joyce. Yeah, I came to him through college, and it was Portrait of the Artist as a young man as part of the undergraduate course. And then having to tackle Ulysses. And again, yeah, it goes over your head a lot, and it's a struggle. But there are those moments, those little turns of phrase that you say, this could only be
can only be written in Dublin,
yeah. And the recognition, like you're walking through the same streets, and you see a statue there sitting in the corner in O'Connell Street.
And just the people. Like the people that I used to see in pubs when I was with my father, or the women, you know, the women trying to be respectful. They were all my aunties, you know, the old Dublin women who who would have this idea of respectability, and in Dubliners as well. He has it in Dubliners too, and Ulysses, and all of his work really.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary, and I think we're very lucky to have him.
Yeah. And just this mammoth work of literature set in your own city that you can dip into and experience.
Christine and Andrew, again, thank you so much for joining me.
So Mike, Solar Bones was the winner of the Dublin International Literary Award in 2018. It is one of only 4 Irish books that have won, and Irish writers that have won the award. 1, how is it to have won it? And 2, how does it affect everything that comes after? Does it add an extra pressure?
Well, what was it like to win it? It was a wonderful accolade. It's the biggest accolade of my career, and I am very proud to have won it. And I never did the tally until you just mentioned it to me there. It's only one of only 4 Irish novels to do it. And it was really one of the things, a couple of the things that are especially valuable about it is that, you know, it's a big prize and a whole city gets behind it, and they see it as one of their kind of flagship cultural events, and that's a big thing. And I remember being with the people who organised it, the Dublin Libraries, and I think it's the Dublin County Council or City Council that finance it, and they were so proud of it. They were so proud of it, and they were so enthusiastic about it, and so it was very easy to feel good about the whole thing because of that. And I remember, you know, later on that evening, my publishers, Lisa Cohen and Sarah Davis-Goff, you know, making wonderful speeches about how theirs was the first, they were the first Irish publisher to win the prize. And also they drew attention to the fact that my agent, Marion Gunn O'Connor, was the first Irish agent to win the prize. That took her completely by surprise. I remember her kind of going, oh yeah, yeah, that is true. And she got a lovely land, as we say, when they heard that. But did it create pressure for me as a writer? The sort of pressure you welcome as a writer. It's kind of okay, you've won a major prize. There are going to be expectations of you, so you just take those on board and you go with it. The book was a year old, I think, by the time I won it. So mentally, you've already moved on, and you've already moved on. In fact, I'd moved on by about 2 years because it finished the book a year before it's published, and then it's another year afterwards. So you're 2 years away from the book, and that when you get all these accolades, and you've moved on, and you're already up to your ankles in the next project and that. So you kind of have to take a step backwards in some ways to receive a prize for a book that's 2 years old. Very welcome step backwards to get a substantial check and a substantial prize. But the pressure that comes with it is, you don't want to be moaning and griping about that sort of thing. You take it in your stride, and this is what part of the reason why you get into the game. You don't get in to win prizes, but if they're there, yeah, you'd like to win one of them once in a while or something like that. So no, it was a completely benign experience. And then and of course there's always the biggest thing. One of the biggest things about it is that it is awarded by libraries, and they take a kind of poll from readers, and they listen to what's happening, what's going out over the desk and everything, and I've always had a genuine relationship with libraries ever since I was a child in national school. The arrival of the mobile library outside the school was such a big thing. Oh my God. To go out to grab my 3 books and to go out, and I was only ever allowed to bring 3 books, and you know, I'd eat 3 books a day nearly at that stage. And then when I moved back to Louisburg, and there was a 1-room library in Louisburg, but it was hardly much bigger than this. It wasn't as big as this, but I did so much valuable reading in that library. So I've always had this kind of attachment. To libraries, and that that it plays such a crucial part in this prize is just makes it that bit more valuable.
And Louisburg, as you mentioned itself, so Louisburg prominent in the novel itself. So as Solar Bones takes place, it's the story of this Mayo man, Marcus Conway, a man who has faltered along the way, although it's interesting he never sort of admits it as an acknowledgement, but he never sort of admits his own hand in that wrongdoing. It's told from the first person perspective, beyond the grave, a single train of thoughts that is in no way linear, coming from the mind of an engineer whose work life has been completely linear, from mathematics of building to the correct composition of concrete. Can you talk to us a little bit about mapping out this book, this sort of non-chronological train of thought, of unexpected leaps that's formed without any of the standard literary structures of it only has paragraphs, it only has commas, but no other punctuation?
Yeah, it seems to me that as a writer, I'm only filling out the ideas I've had in my 20s. And very, very early in my 20s, I tumbled on the idea that, contrary to what my own education told me, which my own education is in the humanities, contrary to what the humanities would have me believe, I believe that engineers make the world. Engineers make the world, and those of us in the humanities resent them for it. It should be us. It should be us poets. It should be us musicians. It should be us, sculptors and artists, but it's not. Engineers make the world. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth, and then he handed it over to civil engineers to make roads, bridges, houses, and all of that kind of thing. And I'd never read a book in which there was an engineer and engineering was celebrated. And I didn't know how to go about doing that. But I seemed in my 20s to hang out this sign in my imagination that said, engineer wanted. And if an engineer shows up here and start talking to me, I will sit and listen to what he has to say. And I think I had that sign hanging out in my imagination from at least my mid-20s. And me being the person that I am, he didn't turn up until my mid-40s. And, 20 years later. And so I started writing him then, and it took 6, 7, 8 years or something like that to write the book. And it's only when I found out the central voice, the particular cadence of the central voice, that dictated that the book would be a single outpour. And once I had got that idea, the book took off in what you say is a non-linear fashion. To me, it is very linear. It's just not a straight line. I've always seen the book as riverine, and late stage riverine. When we learned my generation learned in intercert geography that rivers have two or three stages, and the late stage is where it turns and loops around slowly around itself towards the sea, and that was the late stage. That was that visual image that gave me the kind of flow of the book, and not to worry about it. The book doesn't fly arrow straight, but it actually does fly towards its mark. And it goes around the bend, and it goes twists and turns, but it does get there, and it's quite strategically hung or balanced between the Angelus bell at 12 o'clock and the bell for the 1 o'clock news, and the book is an hour long in many ways, although it's a lot longer than that, but it's suspended in this hour between 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock, which I've always thought was a quite soft hour in the middle of the day. And Marcus reflects on this. He said, it's this funny hour. It's the morning is gone, and it's too early for the dinner. And, the morning energies are all worn up, and it's too early to sit down and square your elbows around the meal and that. So it's this kind of intermediate liminal hour. And once a couple of those things, once I had my engineer turned up, Marcus Conway, he turned up. I had a very visual image of him. He was, kind of heavy, overweight, middle to late middle age and that. And he started talking, and once I got the rhythms of his voice and that, and then it was the 2 time markers that the book kind of, I won't say it fell into place because that makes it sound a lot more sudden than it did, but 6 or 7 years or 8 years, that's not sudden, but that's what happened, yeah.
So I was reading it recently, and it spills across this kitchen table. And to me, it seemed like this single solid structure upon which all these lines and connections sort of appear and fade. The phones and the Zoom screens that dial in and out, that disappear sort of into the ether. The wife poisoned by shit, the daughter painting with blood, and the son that exists sort of only in these pixels. The reader the whole time, though, knows that we've stepped into this journey, into this car, if you like, with Marcus, on a journey that will bring us to that sort of final light where the heart breaks. Was it a conscious effort to have so many parts of it, what I felt were sort of grounded literally in concrete, in these solid foundations, that we would then take this journey with this voice that was coming from beyond the grave?
I think that the house itself is part of the central meditation of it, and that's an autobiographical thing. One of the things that I've kind of prized about my own kind of youth and late teen years was that I worked with my dad and my brother to build our house, and we worked together through right from the time it was a chalk mark on the ground to when we went to live in it. We worked every day on it, built it ourselves with other skilled workers and that, but myself and my brother would have been there on every single day of it and that. So we gained an appreciation of the physical there-ness of a house, the timber, the walls, the concrete, even the soil that has to be excavated, even the fact, we both know, for instance, that there's a huge rock under the kitchen table that's never been moved out of the foundation and that. All of that sort of thing. So it gives a great sense of, there's a great sense of the house's presence. And the novel Solar Bones, it for me, some writers write from hearing characters. I write from seeing them. I see them first and then they speak to me. And what I saw was this man blundering around his own kitchen. And he seemed to know where he was, but not know where he was at one and the same time. So the house it bracketed him, and it also set him in motion. He's at home, and we know why, as we read on, we know why he's at home and why he's come back home. And that's the Day of the Dead thing. That's a kind of it's a custom in my mother's part of the world, up in North Mayo, where the dead come back to visit, and they're welcome. They have a different telling of the same story in Galway. They don't like to see them coming in Galway, as the dead have come a long way and they could eat you out of house and home, and that. So they're quite wary of the dead in Galway. So you're right, and a lot of things. You're right that an awful lot of things, like a pixelated sun comes and goes through the house, disease comes and goes through the house, births and marriages come and go through the house, and everything like that. That seems to me to be existentially true, that a house is a crossroads, it's a locus and a focus for these things, and it enables things to come and go on their way, and that. I'm very conscious of that through kind of thinking back on the building of our house and that was a big part of my memory as I put that book together. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that when you won the Dublin Literary Award, that it was almost 2 years after the book had come out, and the journey of the book itself took you about 6 or 7 years. And in terms of, you also spoke about getting back in contact with it. Is there a sort of a grieving process when you finish a novel and you finish that character and you put it down and you've stepped into the shoes of the next character, you're developing this next character, when you have to go and do interviews again and start talking about reviving this character, is that a strange process?
It's strange in ways that maybe not the ways you pointed out, but I think every writer just has a sense of relief when a book is done. And that's your primary feature. And then 12 to 18 months down the road, you have to start talking about it again. And you've actually have mentally moved on from it. And you might not know and remember what the book is about. And I mean that quite literally. I remember being in London, after the prize, and one of the first interviews I did. It was in a Waterstones in Notting Hill or something like that, and a woman got up in the audience and she put her hand up and she said, "Wouldn't it be true to say that Solar Bones is a story about faith, and that it tells the story about a man who went looking for God, and God gave him the back of his hand, and he turned from the cross and turned towards," and she went on in this vein for a full 5 minutes, and she was brilliant. And with no sarcasm on I turned to the person interviewing me. I said, "You should talk to this woman about the book. You should interview her about the book, because she knows more about it and she has a deeper understanding of it than I do." And I meant that sincerely. She was absolutely brilliant read on the book. I was listening to her thinking, geez, that is a good book, because it was all news to me what she was saying about it and that. And she had just such a brilliant read on it. And I meant to speak to her afterwards and that, but she just hightailed it out of there really quickly. But her read on the book was quite something, I have to say.
Well, I suppose it's interesting when you finish writing a novel and it's published, you hand it over.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose it no longer becomes yours. It's the ownership has passed on to the person who's holding it in their hands.
Yeah, to an extent, and you're glad to get rid of it in some ways in that. You're very glad to get rid of it. I'll tell you something about Solar Bones is that I've written 5 or 6 books on that, and I can remember everything about all the other books, but I can't remember a thing about Solar Bones, and I mean that quite literally. I can't remember writing it, and it's only that I have 10 or 12 years of files on it, or 7 or 8 years of files marked Solar Bones on various hard drives in discs that I'm assured that the book is my own, because part of what happened with it was that I finished the book I pressed send at something like 2:10 in the morning, and myself and Maeve, we got into a car at 9:30 the next morning, and we became parents. We became parents at something like 1 hour later, or an hour and a half later or something. Because Maeve had given me a directive. She said, there's a child coming and there's a book coming. The house is big enough for only one of them, so one of them has to go. So the book went, and it's like my child, like my son rose up between me and the book, and I don't remember the book behind my child. I'm happy with that. That's fine. Seems to me like a fair trade. but I have no memory of. I quite literally have no memory of writing the book, or of anything. And I can remember all my other 5 or 6 books that I've done. Every page of them, but not Solar Bones.
So you gave up a literary child to pick up a literal child.
Part of me is that I in some ways I don't think I did write it. I think I just took dictation. Marcus Conway was so vivid and clear to me that I just think I listened to him and wrote what he had to say, and that was it. Now that doesn't kind of account for the fact that it's a lot more involved than that. But I certainly was listening to someone else's voice other than my own when I was writing that book. So I'm inclined to think that I took dictation rather than wrote the book.
And when you're writing a book, because your first book was a collection of short stories that won the Rooney Prize.
Yeah.
Another fantastic debut, another early acknowledgement, immediate acknowledgement of your writing. How do you Is it very clear earlier on that it's a novel and that it's a short story, or?
Yeah, for me it is. I would never confuse the two. Have I ever confused the two? I don't think so, no. There is this kind of calipers in your head, and you have an idea and you put the calipers down on it and you say, this is a short story. No, Jesus Christ, this has to be opened up wider into a novel and that. And no, thank God I've never confused the two in that. That might happen yet. That may be down the road for me in that, yeah.
And now down the road, your journey has changed slightly, or not changed, but just, you're on the other side now as the director of the University of Galway's creative writing programme. So you're now looking at these new writers coming along, putting down these new thoughts, these new ideas. Was that always a sense that this was something that you wanted to do, that this was something that was important? And is there a two-way sort of back and forth between student and teacher?
No, it's not something that I always wanted to do, but it's something that the sort of books I write and the pace at which I write and that, I just had to get another trade. I'd have starved long ago if I didn't have teaching to fall back on. And I was lucky enough to find places that would take me in as a teacher. I've taught in 5 or 6 different institutions, and I've taught at undergrad level right up to PhD level, and I've also taught, and the most valuable teaching I've ever done was I worked in adult education, where I used to teach for about 14 or 15 years. I taught basic essay writing to students. That was, and always will be, I think, the most valuable teaching that I've ever done. But is there a back and forth between me and my students? Absolutely, yeah. They are the best part of the job. Sitting and talking to them and seeing them develop, and watching them find their own way, and that's a unique pleasure. Absolutely, yeah. Teaching in universities comes with a lot of administrative accoutrement and a lot of other time taken up in other duties and that. But everyone will tell you that the students at the heart of the job, they are the biggest pleasure of the job. Yeah, that doesn't change, and it's still a thrill to see. Right at this moment I'm correcting and I'm going over my students' second semester fiction portfolios, and just seeing the development from what they submitted at Christmas is, you think, yeah, that's good work. Yeah.
Nuala O'Connor and Peter Sirr, welcome to Pearse Street Library, which is where we're talking today. You both have pieces in the brand new One Book, Dublin Written in Our Hearts. Dublin, it's a city of so much history, it's a city of conflict, it's a city of change. How do you go about trying to capture even the tiniest amount of it in your work? Maybe, Nuala, you'll start with that.
I think when you're from here and you've grown up here and done all your schooling and that here, it's in you in a way. I grew up in Palmerstown in West Dublin, but I went to school in town, went to college in town, went to school at Glasnevin as well. So I was always kind of traversing the city. And I think when you want to write about something, it's not that you go looking, it's like a wisp of an idea flies into your head and you either grab onto it or you don't. And when you do, then you already have something, you have a sentence or you have something, and then maybe you start to do a bit of research, continue on with the writing. This is how I do it anyway, research and writing in tandem. And already you're sort of feeling juicy because you have something, and it's just a matter then of getting it down. Like my first novel, which was set in 1980 in Dublin, it's sort of a version of my childhood, but obviously I have fictionalized it heavily. And my second novel also was partially set in Dublin. So I think when you're a starter writer, maybe a baby writer, you draw from what you know, maybe more than you might do later on. Later on, maybe you start looking more towards doing research and writing different things. But at the start, there is a lot of looking back on what you've experienced, who you were, who you are, and writing that. And it's easy when you know and love a place to bring it in. You know, there's, for me anyway, there's great joy in that, there's great satisfaction.
Peter, what about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so slightly different in that I'm a bit of a blow-in, that I only came to Dublin when I was 9, having set out from Waterford, not on my own, I hasten to add, but the family moved here. And I think it's because of that, in a way, that it was all new to me then, and I kind of retained that sense of maybe being a bit of an outsider, so it was always a fascination for me. You know, so coming to Dublin, discovering Dublin, and it's kind of like been since then, that kind of process of discovery. So I kind of date, I suppose, my fascination with the place to that time, and it's certainly, it's kind of my life there and my memories and all of that, and it's also the kind of the history going back, and that sense of this, you know, the sense of Dublin as a kind of layered place, and that I think I was always conscious of, you know, just walking around, because I spent all my, you know, if I think of it like teens, adulthood, continue to do it now, like I'm constantly walking around the city, and you know, you just have that feeling that, you know, here is a place that's been continuously occupied for, you know, a bit more than 1,000 years, and you sort of feel it. It's like you feel the impress of the lives beneath you, and so from that point of view, like it's there in, it kind of got itself into the poems that I wrote and the book that I ended up writing. And I think it's also because when I left when I left a place near here, Trinity College, and went to see what we call the Careers and Disappointments officer, and I ended up spending a lot of time outside of Ireland and then coming back here. And then kind of engaging with it and kind of falling in love with it again, maybe, or rediscovering it. That had a big impression as well. And that came into the way that I wrote about it. And then writing the book from which this excerpt is taken, which really started off just from walking my own immediate neighbourhood, and then keeping going and walking more, and then sort of the same kind of thing, walking back through the history and looking for stories, not writing proper history, but just kind of wandering around, you know, places like this through archives and delving into the city's past and trying to find ways of writing about it. So all those kind of things came together, I suppose.
I'm going to ask you both about your pieces that are in this year's One Dublin One book. Nuala, Dublin is a city of statues and a city of monuments, and you've chosen to include the Jesus of taxi drivers, formerly in the centre of O'Connell Street and now moved slightly to the left since the Lewis works were done. But you make him so much more than that. Maybe talk to us a little about that.
Yeah, so my story, Jesus of Dublin, I wrote it in 2012, and just around that time, I heard he was getting a new box, so his third shrine as far as I know, and it just piqued my interest because I went to school on Marlborough Street, so I used to pass Jesus on my way home to get the bus and the keys, and I heard he was getting the new box, and it must have been around the same time I don't know when it was, doesn't matter. I went to see a play, and the actor Noel Purcell was sitting near me, and he was shuffling past me, and he said, "Oh, the old pins are not the best," and his voice I gave to Jesus then, Noel Purcell's voice. So it's a kind of a Noel Purcell-y Jesus. And the conceit of it is that, yes, he does his great work there, watching over the city, watching over the taxi drivers, all of us really, but that he takes a little rest when it's nobody's looking. So that's the idea of it. And he has a haranguing mother who's Stella Maris, and, you know, just the usual thing, the same thing that we all have. So it was very much Jesus of Dublin with a Dublin accent. Yeah, and just giving him voice. And, you know, there's sort of stories about the statue that it had come out of the Gresham Hotel and was a gift to the taxi drivers. And then there's another story that it was bought by taxi drivers to commemorate one of their own. So there's various stories about it, but sure, it doesn't really matter which of them are true. And there's another one about 1916, which I highly doubt. But yeah, he's still there. I feel like he has been demoted a bit, being shoved down on Carlborough Street. Maybe it's time to bring him back.
And Peter, the excerpt of yours that's included in the book, Dublin is a city of memorials and bridges named after writers. Some of them are appropriate, some of them less appropriate. Tell us a little bit about the excerpt that's been used in the book this year.
Yeah, I suppose the excerpt looks at I suppose the whole thing. I like the politics of commemoration and the fact that, you know, you can't put up a statue very often without offending half the city. You know, it's kind of, and so a lot of the statues, as we know, of Dublin were controversial, and lots of them got blown up. You know, famously, Nelson's Pillar got blown up. Also, General Gough in the Phoenix Park blown up. But I was interested in this idea. Okay, so it's, on the one hand, it's okay if you're a general and you have your horse and you have your sword or your baton. But if you're a writer, I mean, writers live in their heads and in their books. So when a sculptor has to make a statue of a writer, it's kind of an awkward thing. And if you think about it, I mean, think of Joyce outside the Kylemore, is it, in kind of North Earl Street, and slightly kind of swaggering with his cane. You think, okay, that's okay. Then this Oscar Wilde, very colourfully lounging in Merrion Square. I also think it's kind of on the edge of cheesy. But on the other hand, you know, you have, what I like is I walk past him practically every day, is Patrick Kavanagh looking into the canal, and that seems to make more sense because he lived there, he wrote about it. Or the seat just up the road from it, the kind of simple kind of wood and granite seat where people come every St. Patrick's Day to read his works, and so that seems to make a lot of sense. And then on the other side of the canal, or sorry, the other side of the city on the Royal Canal, you have Brendan Behan by the same sculptor, John Call, who did Kavanagh. Not that they were great, they were kept decently far apart. And Kavanagh's there kind of not looking into the canal, but looking almost at the passerby as if you've said something that he might object to, you know, that kind of thing. And they're great, I think. And the other thing, I love plaques, just simple things like, again, you walk along the canal and you see something like Elizabeth Bowen spent 7 winters in this house, you know, like as in her book, 7 Winters. And just that kind of notion that people have lived here. Or I walk past, the first thing I walk past is when I'm walking up Clonbrassil Street and I see the plaque, "Here in the imagination of James Joyce lived Leopold Bloom, citizen, father, husband, reincarnation of Ulysses." I think that's great. It's a plaque for somebody who never existed. So that appeals to me as well. Because also, you know, how do you celebrate kind of writers in a public space? It's kind of that is the question, and that seems to me to be one of the answers to how you can do it.
The Anna Livia statue.
Yeah,
that was on
That was, yeah.
Which is another fictional
yes. The one that people used to throw the washing up liquid into, and she got demoted. She's now in Collins, just beside Collins Barracks, kind of on the way to Houston Station.
She looks good there.
In a quiet little park.
She looks a little abandoned there.
Abandoned, yeah.
I don't know, it's a nice little park. If you're walking around the area, I go in and say hello.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask maybe both of you about that very famous quote of Joyce's that's thrown out a lot, where he said, "I always write about Dublin because if I can get to the heart of Dublin, I can get to the heart of all of the cities of the world." Do you think by zooming in on the personal, it's easier to find more of the universal? Maybe Nuala, I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, I think of course it is. Like at Dublin is Dublin, its built self, but it's also the people who live in the city, and they are what makes the personality of the city, the slightly swaggery, gritty, humorous place that it is, you know. Dublin has a real feel to it, you know, and it's a low city as well, so there's a lot of light, there's plenty of green space. You know, people talk about the danger in it and the violence and all of that, and absolutely it's there, but for me, I'm in exile in Galway the last 29 years. I come back and all I see are the good parts of it, you know, and I miss it terribly. I'd still love to live here, but it's not possible at the moment. But yeah, I do think that the people and the characters that inhabit a city are what makes it. And that's definitely what Joyce was celebrating in all of his work, maybe particularly Ulysses, but also the likes of Brendan Behan. They used the voices of the people as much as the physicality of the city and the river and the whole lot. And I know when I was a kid and I was reading Patricia Lynch and Carolyn Swift, and then later Joyce and Behan and Bowen and all of these people, I could hear the city in it. I could feel the city in it. They were my people, my language. There was nothing alien. I didn't think of these things as high literature. They were just people talking lovingly, and sometimes not so lovingly, about a place that I loved. And there was no, for me, I was a very bookish, very introverted child. There was no separation really between these literary works and my life. It all seemed very intertwined.
Pierre?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I mean, Joyce, I mean, he famously said that if Dublin were to vanish, that it could be reconstructed from the pages of Ulysses. And that's true to an extent. It was very much like, you know, he left it at an early age and he never came back. But in another sense, he never left it. He was there imaginatively all his life, and he paid rigorous attention to it. And I think that's the thing about it. It's like, it's the city, but it's the quality. So it's the quality of the attention. I mean, it's the same with Kavanagh. So it's like those poems that he wrote in Baggot Street, or around the canal and the area where he lived around Raglan Road and all of that. It's this kind of, it's the quality of that attention that makes it interesting, and it makes a city. It's not just the Dublinness, if you like, of it, but the universality comes from that quality of attention. You know, so I think that's important in a sense. I think of other, you know, great kind of writers like Cavafy in Alexandria, and he's kind of focusing obsessively kind of on that, and that becomes his city. But like, I mean, I think of all the, again, that walk up, my daily walk along the canal. I mean, I think of Kavanagh and Kinsella and Ivan Boland, and I think of, or I think of Ivan, you know, I think of Harry Clifton or Paul Meehan. So there, I can think of all these presences. But again, in all their cases, it's not just they happen to live in a city, but again, it's the quality of their kind of individual visions that make that city come alive as well.
And I might throw a similar question to you, Nuala, given that Peter's just talked about maybe those writers that make Dublin come most alive. Who are the ones for you that stand out?
Definitely when I was young, it was the likes of Bean and Joyce. I came in from Palmerstown through Chapel Is It along the quays to school. And so that was their sort of stomping grounds that I was going through. And so there was that lovely thing of knowing the place that's in the books, which I loved. Carolyn Swift did the same thing when I was much younger. She had this series of books, Robbers in the House and Robbers in the Street and all of this. And they were all set around Kilmainham, which would be an area that I would know. So for me, that very much brings it all alive. Then you grow up a bit, and I was reading more Joyce and Elizabeth Bowen, who her family were out in Cork in Clondalkin, which is another area I know. And, you know, so you feel the people around you as you move through the city, not necessarily ghost-like, but as living things. And Joyce's meticulous details, you know, the shops on O'Connell Street and all, they were all still around when I was a kid, because Dublin was quite a depressed city then, in the sense there was no investment and stuff. And so there was very little change. So the architecture of those times was the architecture kind of I grew up with as well. And I loved that. And I miss it. I miss that. Quite envious of your walk along the canal every day. I'd love to be doing that. You know, I'll miss the physicality of the place. I'm very attached to the river as well, because I grew up in the Liffey Valley. The river was only yards from our door, and it was our playground. We played in it, we built rafts, we were on it, in it, you know, fishing in it. My uncle had a boat, he'd take us out. So there's those things that you miss that are really woven into you. I would say I'm less hysterically in love with Dublin than I used to be. I mean, the longing to come back in my 30s was enormous. But I'm older now and I'm a long time away, and I would love to come back, but now it feels like a pipe dream in a way. But yeah.
In terms of One Dublin, One Book, you've been here before as well with Nora. Maybe talk a little bit about digging into the history that you needed to dig into in order to make her come to life.
Yeah, so I walked all the places, you know, up and down Nassau Street to what was Finn's Hotel and is now the Lincoln Inn, where she worked, out to Ringsend, where they had their first assignation, up to the corner where the Wilds lived, where they met for their first date and all those kind of things. It's not a hard city to recreate, as I say. There's so much written about Dublin. There's so much beautiful photography, period photography of the time. And I love research. I mean, I'm kind of a research fetishist, so I didn't mind that deep dive into the archives and the history to make sure that I had that sort of 1904 Dublin correct. And then there's so much written about Joyce. Any aspect of Joyce you can think of, there's something written about it. So the research was easy in the sense that it's all there, but vast in the sense that there's a lot there. And so I had to do an awful lot of reading, but I don't mind that. It's grand. And of course there's Elman, and there's Brenda Maddox's wonderful biography of Nora. So yeah, read, write. It was great.
I want to ask you, Peter, about the podcast that you run with your wife, the poet, and Wiley Books for Breakfast. How did that come about as a project?
It was a real lockdown project. I mean, it was something that, you know, at the time nobody could launch their books, nobody could go to a reading. So it really came out of that desire to give, you know, ourselves and other people a kind of chance just to kind of come and talk about their work. And so we open it up. We interview poets, novelists. We created a thing called the Toaster Challenge, where a guest has to talk about a book that has resonated with them for, they have to talk for as long as it takes to make a decently charred slice of toast. So yeah, we didn't think, so we just thought it was a kind of a temporary thing, and we make it at home in the house, using the internet and now we can go and meet people as well. So it's kind of a bit of fun, but it's also still a way of just kind of, because our most recent one had a poet from Florida, talking about his life there, in Miami, and it also had poets who were reading in Strokestown for the poetry festival. So it's kind of like it's a window on the world of writing, and it's what I like. It's kind of basic technology, so it's easy to kind of to do. You're not having to make a video or you make, and I love sound, I love audio, and love podcasts. So that's it all comes from that.
You've been a director of the Irish Writers' Centre as well. Maybe talk a little bit about that experience and about just how important the Writers' Centre is.
Yeah, I came back to Dublin in the early 1990s, and after that period abroad, and Dublin was going through a bit of a renaissance then. There was the whole redevelopment of the Temple Bar becoming a cultural quarter, and new kind of institutions being set up there. The IFI in there, the ARC, Children's Cultural Centre, all of that. And then at the same time, the Irish Writers' Centre was being set up. So it seemed like a really good moment in Irish culture, because writers, nobody sort of thinks about them that much in terms of organisations, and they think, okay, writers just write and they do their work, and so they don't need much. Not like an art gallery or a cinema, but we were created, and we started to. A number of different organisations came together, playwrights and the Irish Writers' Union and translators and all that, and they set up this thing in the middle of the city, and it was great. We were able to put on events, we were able to start running courses for writers, and just trying to kind of create opportunities for writers, initially in the centre and then more widely across the country, and that's been developed a lot now since then. There are all kinds of things going on now, like residencies and opportunities for writers, and so I think it's very important that writers should have a kind of resource centre for them, which they didn't have before, and now it has kind of gone on from that.
Nuala, you've been a facilitator, you've been a panellist. Tell me about your experiences at the Irish Writers' Centre.
Yeah, I love the Irish Writers' Centre. It's like a home from home for me in Dublin. I love the building itself. I love the FX Buckley art collection. It's lovely to go back into a place and see the same art on the walls that you saw the last time you were there over the course of, well, how many years would it be now that I'm gone? Probably more than 20. As, first of all, a student. I did courses with Claire Keegan, for example, and the writer from Kildare, John McKenna, excellent facilitator, and just got so much from them, because I didn't do a master's in writing or didn't go to college to do writing. So this was a way, the Writers' Centre and Pat Bourne's book, The Portable Creative Writing Workshop, that was my little Bible when I was starting out. And just to have somewhere where you were meeting people who were as interested in writing as you were was fantastic. And then as time went on and I was publishing, I did facilitate some courses there, short story mostly and flash fiction and things like that. But now I go there 4 times a year for the Word Forum meetings, which are for professional writers, and we meet just to discuss issues, to, you know, not so much affect policy, but to bring news to the directors and that just about what it is we feel we need, because there is a lot of support for debut authors. That's where a lot of the investment goes. But then writers inevitably want to publish a second book and a third book, and it's sometimes that's where people get lost. And it's to have support for that crew that's good. And the centre, with every director, it changes slightly, and it's expanding out into the country more and more, which is wonderful. But also as a base and a central place for people to go, it's excellent.
Nuala and Peter, it's been lovely to talk to you, and thanks for taking the time.
Thanks a million, Rick.
Thank you.